On today's episode, a big list call for the Bombers. Can the Swans turn their season around? And we take a look at the indicative draft order. All that and more on today's episode of Zero Hanger TV. All right, so first thing on the agenda, the Saints and the Bombers are on a bit of a slide after really strong starts to the season.
Yeah, well, obviously the Bombers have 4 losses in a row. The Saints have had 3 in their past 5. But they both, I think, are sitting at least above where many thought they would be, at least at this point of the year, and potentially at the end of the season. The Saints in 5th, Bombers fallen a bit further outside of the top 8, but I think both of them weren't expected to really be in that race for a top 8 spot, especially the Bombers, ahead of round 1 anyway.
So what would you say are their main concerns at the moment?
I'd be pretty happy if I was a fan of either club. Both have been hit with injuries quite extensively. They've been some good clubs across the opening 9 rounds, and some pretty interesting fixtures to come. Now the Saints have GWS, Hawthorn, Sydney and Richmond, so still a very winnable next month to come. So they certainly could tilt that right back in their favour and push straight back into that top 4. Essendon and Richmond this weekend, Dreamtime at the G, always a very special game, and it's certainly going to be a big one. We're going to learn a lot, I think, about those 2 clubs. And then following that match for the Bombers, they have North Melbourne and West Coast. So you don't want to say easy wins in footy, but the way those 2 teams are playing at the moment, you certainly could chalk them down for successive wins, and then that could be 3 in a row if they beat Richmond. And they also play West Coast and North Melbourne for a second time in round 21 and 22. So that's 4 wins for the Bombers that they should be locking in throughout the year, plus what they've already got in their bag, and a few others to come along the way. So from a concerns point of view, current form dipping a little bit, but I think with the injuries, they've certainly got a few excuses.
Yeah, that Dreamtime clash is always one to watch. Really exciting stuff. So staying on the Bombers, they've got a big list call to make at the end of the year, and midfielder Darcy Parish is out of contract as well. Yeah,
one of, I think, 7 restricted free agents this season, and Essendon great Matthew Lloyd actually raised it over the weekend. Do they look to trade him? It's something we covered on Zero Hanger a few weeks ago, and his value is skyrocketing this season, as it did in his last contract year of 2021. While he's probably their best player, or at least they're one of their most informed players, do they look to cash in on that value and turn his trade capital into maybe a strength elsewhere? Now, Lloyd said, key position defenders is probably what they're after. They could also maybe even use key forward to support Peter Wright. I think they probably haven't seen what they've wanted out of Harrison Jones and Zach Reid at either end of the field, and a lot of that comes down to injuries. I think, do they look to move Parish on, whether that's through trade or just gaining free agency compensation and using some of that returning capital to get a player that can either work at either end of the field and really help them in their spine.
So if they were to let Parish go or move him on, who would they look to get in return, basically?
Well, it's a funny one. If you want key position players, and I think if you're going to look at their defence, then Ben Mackay and Harry Himmelberg are 2 free agents, restricted free agents, just like Parish. So it makes things a bit tricky when you're letting one free agent go and getting another in, because the compensation can cancel out in a way. Now, I think what they'd get in return for Parish would probably be a bit greater than what the Giants and the Roos might get for Mackay and Himmelberg. It's all very reliant on deals that come through from other clubs, but they can still work through trades, and if Parish is going out to another club, work through a trade that way, and so that way they can still get compensation in. So work through a trade for Mackay or Himmelberg if they want to get compensation in. Himmelberg can play both ends of the field, which is always great, and would be a big boost for the Bombers. And then on top of that, as far as available forwards, Mitch Georgiadis, probably one of the best available forwards from a contract perspective. And if they wanted to find someone to sit next to Peter Wright in that attacking forward line, Georgiadis would be a pretty handy one to have.
Yeah, that'd be quite interesting. So a lot of decisions to make for Brad Scott and his Bombers at the end of the year. So now moving over to the Swans, they've had a pretty horrid start to the season with a lot of injuries. So can they turn it around?
Look, 3 and 6, it doesn't read too well. I think, like you said, the injuries they've had, particularly down back, have really put them in this position. I don't think there's too much you can falter through other areas of the field. Maybe their key forwards, they're now missing Logan McDonald for close to 8 weeks. Add Callum Mills to that injury list that has both McCartan brothers, Dane Rampiel out for at least a month. So there's 5 core players right there that are going to be missing some more time. So it really is tough. I think when you look back at 2017, they started 0-6 and managed to reach a qualifying final, or I think it was a semi-final. By the end of the year, that was a one in a million, I think you'd have to say. And if they can do it again, it's going to be really tough. The next few weeks are really going to see how they can set up their season. But with the injuries that they've got continuing through each round, it's stacking up against them at the moment.
Yeah, they're feeling pretty unlucky in the injury department. So what does the run ahead look like?
Well, they've got a couple easier games in the next couple of weeks before their bye. They've got North Melbourne this week, but after the bye, St Kilda and Brisbane. So if they can find form, if they can get some players back, thanks to that bye break, in time for the games against two finals contenders at the moment, then they might be able to turn things around ahead of that round 15, round 16 mark.
Yeah, hopefully hopefully they turn it around for the Swannies. So looking ahead to looking at the rookie rankings, so a little bit of movement in the top 7.
So I think all three at the top have held their spot. Harry Sheasel and Will Ashcroft at 1 and 2. It's very close at this point, I think, between those two. Max Michelani in 3 with a bit of daylight, I think, both in front of him and behind him. But the bottom 4 in our top 7 all shifted. So Ruben Jimby's come up 2 spots to 4th overall. That's seen Ollie Hollands drop down 1. Matthias Philp, who's come up 1 spot into 6th. And then Alex Cincotta has dropped 2 spots after he made his first appearance last week.
Yeah. So who's sitting outside that top 7?
There's a few actually now. Seamus Mitchell's absolutely fantastic for the Hawks over the weekend, despite the loss to Melbourne. And in that game as well, Jacob Van Rooyen was fantastic, I thought. And he'll have, I think, a bit more to say now that they've lost Harrison Petty in that forward line. So interesting one to watch for him. And the round 9 Rising Star nominee, Bailey Humphrey, was exceptional for the Suns in their win over West Coast. There's a bit of a chasing pack now, which we probably haven't had as much across the opening 8 or so rounds. But it's really tight for those top 7 spots.
Yeah. So speaking of exciting young talent in the game, we're going to move over to the indicative draft order. So what are we taking a look at the end of the year come the draft order?
Well, at the moment it's going to be quite interesting, and a lot of it could come down to this weekend when you've got Hawthorn and West Coast playing off, and that really could decide who ends up with the wooden spoon and therefore pick one at the end of the year. Now, it'll also probably decide who has pick one for the mid-season draft, which we'll touch on later this week. But from an indicative draft order point of view and kind of looking, long term, you've got the Hawks at pick 1, West Coast pick 2, North at pick 3. And you'd think that those 3 clubs are probably going to stay around there at that point. Now, after them, you've got the Giants and then the Swans as well to round out the top 5. And this is where it gets interesting after that. So at pick 6, GWS have another selection. So they've obviously got Richmond's pick, and then shortly after them, Melbourne at pick 7, and they've got Fremantle's pick. So now North Melbourne and the Bulldogs, another 2 clubs that have multiple first-round picks. North got theirs off Port Adelaide, and that famous 4-club Jason Horne-Francis trade, and then the Dogs as well holding Brisbane's after parting with Josh Dunkley. So they're 2 clubs that will have multiple first-round picks as well, and more so at the back end on how it's shaping up at the moment. And another one that probably went under the radar a bit, and obviously isn't shown as a first-round pick, but the opening pick of the second round, a highly valuable pick that'll open up the second night of the draft, is actually in the Swans' hands. They grabbed that last year from Hawthorn. The Hawks wanted to get Josh Weddle in, obviously quite badly, so they parted with, I think it was about 3 picks in the end, one of them being their future first round, another one being their future second round, and I think it was a second round from last year to get pick 18, and therefore Josh Weddle. So the Swans, already holding a top 5 pick at the moment, and also holding another pick just to start the second round on top of their own second rounder, so about 3 in the top 23 at the moment.
Yeah, so still early days, but some exciting stuff to look forward to. They're calling that game this weekend the Harley Reid Cup.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, I think it's pretty appropriate. So finishing up as always with the MVP. So Bont stays at the top and Petrarca has moved to second place.
Yeah, so Bont holding the same lead as he did last week with 13 votes ahead of the rest of the pack, but it's Christian Petrarca who's moved into second spot. Great performance against the Hawks again, so he'll move up another one. He's fired over the last, 3 or 4 weeks. That sees him surpass Nick Dacos, who I think picked up 10 votes himself. Pretty decent performance, I think another 40 plus touches, but just decent, I guess, for 40 plus touches for Nick Dacos. He's in third spot. Jordan Dawson, Clayton Oliver both polled, so they're 4th and 5th. Jeremy Cameron failed to get a vote in that game against Richmond. And then another one, new face back into the top 10, Jordan De Goey. He's only polled in 4 games, I think, so far this year, but 4 really big performances that have warranted him a spot back in our top 10.
Yeah, awesome stuff. All right, so that wraps it up for Zero Hanger TV today. Thanks, Mitch.
Thanks, Phoenix.
And don't forget, you can subscribe to our YouTube channel and catch up on all the latest AFL news at zerohanger.com.